Okay. I think we've got a lot of the participants that we were expecting on, so I'd like to make a start. So welcome all. My name is Matthew Clemo, CSI. This is our sort of first inaugural webinar to introduce, specifically designed for financial services companies. CSI as an MSP, we've worked last, we've been running for 35 years, but over the last 10 years we've worked with a lot of financial services companies and their existing clients, and we found that we feel this will be a great forum to share and help our existing customers and any other potential customers that are out there that would be interested in looking at areas or subjects within IT. Specifically for small financial services companies. Today we'll start with phishing, but the next one we'll look at IT outsourcing and the latest guidance from the FCA. So we'll intend to run one a month, and from there, so we're keen to get any feedback from yourselves that would help us to add value, or anything that you would be interested in hearing from us. You would like to start the first slide?
I will.
Cool.
With me. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, I can see that. As I say, I just wanted to, that's the first introduction slide that we see. If you want to skip through to the next one, David, that'd be appreciated. Myself, as I said, I work for CSI. I'm specifically focused within the financial services sector. I have been for over 10 years, and over that time, we've worked with lots of small financial services companies in various shapes or forms, and in helping them to move to IT outsourcing, moving into the cloud, moving to public cloud. And I've been very, and obviously we've fought, and through that we've got a really good feeling of how the understanding of the IT departments within those businesses and their challenges and goals and what they're looking for. David, can I introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. David Mount from Cofense. I'm responsible for sales engineering and everything outside of the Americas. And if you don't know Cofense, we're laser focused on helping organizations across all sectors, but particularly finance, better defend their organizations against the evolving phishing threat. And we work with CSI to help organizations like yours do exactly that.
Okay, we've moved to the next slide. Thank you, David. So today, as an overview of the agenda, we'll look at the common challenges with phishing and the methodologies of how we deal with those challenges, and then look at how we could help you build an effective strategy to combat these. And the next one. Just the general setting. I mean, we as I say, we've been working with a lot with small financial services companies over the years, and I think we recognise that the IT departments within these financial services organisations are quite challenged and getting more challenged for resources and budgets, and we're finding that to be able to adhere to adhere with the latest FCA regulations, and being able to address the digital services, oncoming digital services that their customers are looking for, and also being able to protect their data is becoming even more of a challenge. You just want to take the next one, please, David. So today we're going to have a little bit of a deep dive into phishing, and we feel that phishing is, again, it's such an important issue and can potentially have a massive impact for any organisation. And I think the smaller the organisation, the probably more difficult to put an effective strategy in place. And And as part of that, obviously we would like to work, as we thought would be a great subject to address for the first webinar. And so I'd like to just pass this over to David.
Great, thank you, Matthew. So welcome everyone. As Matthew said, phishing presents a threat to all organizations. I certainly see it from, the remit and the focus that I have across the organizations that we work with outside of the Americas. So I'm dealing with Europe, dealing with the Middle East, I'm dealing with the Asia Pacific region. And those challenges are really consistent across each of those regions. Really, there's no great uniqueness in terms of the phishing problem, regardless of where we are globally. And fundamentally, for any organization, phishing presents a number of risks. But what it does is it's placing your most precious assets at risk. Now, whether or not that be your people, your brand and its associated reputation, the data that you're trying to protect, the privacy of your customers, your consumers, your employees, your partners, and so forth, but also your intellectual property and the value that is derived from your organization by shareholders or other partnerships within the organizations. And the thing that needs to really be understood in terms of phishing defense is that we established ourselves in sort of the approach we take in terms of pioneering this concept of phishing simulation way back in 2008 as a mechanism by which organizations can aid their end users to understand the phishing threat landscape and be able to better defend. Well, the reality is threats have fundamentally changed in that time, but the way organizations approach defense haven't really changed. The reality is that traditional security awareness programs that organizations put in place and the secure email gateways that they put at the perimeter of their organizations, they really no longer provide adequate defense to organizations. And it creates this conundrum that organizations have got to really accept, that there's two fundamentals in terms of phishing defense. Is the organizations have got to accept that bad continues to evade the perimeter controls that organizations put in place, which means that those threats that are hitting the organizations are getting through those controls and they are landing in end users' inboxes. And we'll take a look a bit later at some of those threats and some examples of the stuff that we're observing in our customers. And we'll also take a look at some of the numbers and some of the statistics around what we see from a financial services perspective. The other real sort of fundamental is that, well, threats are reaching the inbox, and it doesn't matter how good your awareness programs are, some users will likely click on those threats. And we'll take a look at things like average click rates, average susceptibility in terms of simulation emails a little bit later for financial services. But you've really got to kind of accept these two fundamentals when we're thinking about phishing defense. And when we kind of accept these fundamentals, it really leads us to ask ourselves a question, which is, well, what's our plan B? If we accept that our defenses at the perimeter can't stop every threat, and we accept that our end users or some of those end users will likely click on those threats and potentially become compromised or present a risk to the organization, well, what is it we do next? And really, those two fundamentals sort of lead on to two imperatives that organizations need. And that is, one, to be able to get visibility of the threats that have bypassed controls, and two, be able to respond faster to protect the organization. So let's take a look at the threat landscape. And, I like to say that real fish are the real problem. So many organizations focus on phishing simulation and phish testing, and that absolutely plays a really important role in terms of our overall phishing defense strategy. But we've got to accept, it's the real bad stuff that's the real problem that we've got to address. And if we take a look at some of our perspective on the phishing threat landscape. We have a phishing defense center. Customers like partners like CSI deliver those services, and those customer users are reporting the emails that they believe to be suspicious into these, what are essentially SOC teams. And those SOC teams are then doing the prioritization, the analysis of those threats to understand what is being reported. And we've had, out of 2 million emails that have been reported to our Phishing Defence Centre, well, we identified over 200,000 threats that weren't stopped by technology. And the really important thing to recognize is, for an end user to be able to report a threat, well, that threat has to be delivered to their inbox. For it to be able to be delivered to their inbox, it had to bypass the controls that organizations put in place to stop them. So, we see across pretty much every single secure email gateway vendor, or across every sort of cloud email security supplement type technology, that threats are evading those controls. And we see some fairly common malware families, for example. So threats like Agent Tesla, TrickBot, Emotet, Guloader, for example. I don't know if any of you were following the news recently about the threat of the RIAC ransomware to healthcare organizations in the US. There's a lot of noise about that over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks. Well, Bazaar Backdoor as a loader was considered to be very important in terms of the delivery of that RIAC ransomware as a secondary payload to those endpoints. And we're seeing the Bazaar Backdoor threat evading controls and being delivered to the inbox. So there's some significant volumes of threats that are evading controls, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? Because we're seeing these threats because end users are reporting them. And if we take a look at some of the numbers that we see from a financial services perspective, and we look back over the last 12 months, we can see the overall volume of malicious for financial services customers sits slightly lower than average. Now, there's a number of potential hypotheses as to why this is the case. One is maybe financial services organizations have deeper pockets and have greater layers of control that maybe is sort of filtering out more of the known threats, and there's fewer getting through. I think that's unlikely if we look at the actual volume of threats. One of the things that we'll take a look at shortly is this sort of creation of the network of human sensors and the end user themselves being that human sensor and reporting threats. Now, we'll see that the finance industry has a pretty healthy reporting culture overall, and that then tends to lead to more emails being reported, and therefore you get a greater proportion of false positives. So the volume of threats tends to be fairly consistent, but still a very significant volume of threats that are evading controls being delivered to the inbox. And we can see, if we start to break down some of the categories of those threats, we can see that financial services is seeing a higher than average volume of scams. Business email compromise, this is unsurprising really. So those types of threats where the email is either spoofing an executive within the organization or a trusted third party, and really these emails are trying to solicit either privileged information, they're trying to get payments to be made, or they're we see very commonly actually things like I need you to go and buy some iTunes gift cards, and then scratch off the foil on the back and send me the photo of these because I need these. I'm going into an important meeting and I need you to deliver that stuff. So, a higher than average volume of business email compromise type threats that are hitting financial organizations, and also a higher than average volume of credential harvesting. So when we look at the threat landscape, Credential harvesting is by far the biggest threat type that we see. Again, no great surprise. Credentials are, often considered the crown jewels by the threat actor. They're seen as the keys to the kingdom in terms of getting access to an organization and then being able to move laterally within that organization once they have credentials. Two-factor authentication obviously provides some degree of additional security there, but equally there are capabilities that are being developed by threat actors that are, absolutely looking to circumvent two-factor authentication there too. Again, malware, pretty consistent in terms of what we see in terms of malware-based threats, and then a very high volume of what we refer to as suspicious. And suspicious, any email that falls into this suspicious category would be an email that is clearly malicious and clearly has malicious intent, but the payload is not available at the time of analysis. So this would be maybe where very short-term URLs, for example, that are there for a short period of time and then are not there moving forward. So, financial services sees a significant volume of different threat types. And if we look at things like file extensions in terms of, what types of file extensions are being used to deliver malicious payloads across our customers, well, we can see, right on the left-hand side, PDFs, for example, being by far the most prevalent file extension or file type that is used to deliver malicious payloads. Now, some people might find that surprising because there's often a perception that, well, PDFs are the safer documents, right? They don't have macros in the same way that Word documents, Excel files, and so forth can do. So, they're the safer ones. Well, the reality is threat actors know that there's a perception that people have that PDFs are the safer attachment type. And quite often PDFs are used to deliver a link to a malicious site. And we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. And the reason they put the link into the PDF is to prevent the scanning and the safe links and URL prefetching that is done by perimeter email controls. But other things that's really interesting in terms of this list, we can see pretty high up, we've got .doc within there. I can't remember when Microsoft switched away from .doc as the standard format to docx. The same for XLS as well. Plus, there are also some more obscure file types that are being used in here. So Java Network Launch Protocol or JNLP files, ISO files, for example. ISO files were really interesting. We were tracking across our customers ISO files being used to deliver malicious payloads. And we found that typically perimeter controls were vulnerable to that particular tactic and technique for a period of about 9 months before perimeter control vendors kind of caught up and then were able to deliver capabilities that effectively protected organizations from those types of threats. So let's take a look at some of the different threat types and threat examples that we've seen come across our customers here. So, using common survey tools, so using SurveyMonkey here to be able to deliver a credential harvesting attack. And the thing that we've got to remember here is that platforms like SurveyMonkey, they're often used legitimately within organizations. So these are not the type of URLs that are specifically blocked. They might even be whitelisted in some organizations because of the way that they're used to capture information within the organization itself. And so when they're then used and they're then exploited to deliver credential harvesting, it becomes very difficult for not only technology, but the end user to be able to defend against. And the thing to remember there is that the threat actor's got one goal. They just need to make it to the inbox, because from there, the end user is fundamentally doing the rest. Another example here is a URL that you click on the view file link within this particular email, and it then downloads the ersniff Trojan onto the endpoint. And here we can see that it's spoofing or utilizing the Box platform to deliver that payload. So again, what we're not trying to do is push the payload through the secure email gateway. We're just looking to have a link out to a third-party cloud service where the end user then pulls that threat down themselves. This is a really interesting example here, delivering the pyrogenic stealer malware. Now, people look at this and they say, well, that's an attachment-based threat because it's got a PDF that's attached to it. Well, the reality is this is a link-based threat, and actually, this bit here, it's a fake attachment. That's actually an image that's embedded into the body of the email itself. So if I think, well, I've got well-conditioned end users and I condition my user to click the little down arrow and then click on the preview of the attachment before they open it, if they need to check it, well, clicking on that little down arrow actually means they visit the link, which then downloads the pyrogenic stealer malware from there. So, threat actors are constantly thinking about the way that we can lure or trick the recipient into performing the action that we want them to perform. And here, just another example of credential theft. And this is where the threat actors are abusing sort of trusted cloud platforms again. So in this case, they're abusing the SharePoint.com platform. And again, if we think about the ubiquity of platforms like Office 365 and the fact that as organizations, we're using services like SharePoint.com, we're using OneNote, we're using Google Docs, we're using these other platforms on a daily basis, it's really hard to defend because we can't just block those services. And actually for technology itself, this is a credential harvesting, and we'll see in a second that the credential harvesting stuff is starting to be delivered via this platform. It then becomes very difficult if there's a credential harvesting page that looks and feels like a Microsoft login page that is hosted on legitimate Microsoft infrastructure. It becomes very difficult for technology to tell the difference of, well, is this legitimate or isn't it? And here, if we were to click on that SharePoint link, what it would do is it would take us to a OneNote folder where there is this link to view a PDF document. And if the end user clicked in this OneNote here with this link to view the document, they then get taken to a landing page where they can choose to either sign in with Office 365 or sign in with another mail platform. If they choose to sign in with Office 365, it then presents them with what looks like a Microsoft sign-in page. And then ultimately, once they've delivered their and given their credentials, well, they then get presented with a PDF. And so as far as the end user concerned, they received what they expected to receive at the end of this process. Maybe what they don't realize is that unwittingly, they have given up their credentials in the process of doing that. So when we think about our awareness programs and we think about our awareness campaigns, we've got to think beyond that initial link that just sits within the email itself. We've got to think about, okay, well, if I click that link, well, what happens next? Where does it take me? Does this look normal? Is this usual for me to kind of go to SharePoint and then see this type of login page? For example, the user's got to stay aware at all stages through that delivery of the payload. So we've looked at some threats, and we've kind of discussed that there's a need for this plan B within organizations to better defend against phishing threats. So, what does it look like in terms of putting plan B into action? Well, fundamentally, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to create a network of human sensors. Because if technology is failing to stop the threats from reaching the end user, well, the only sensor that you've got in your environment that can tell you that that threat exists is the end user themselves. And we all need to get out of the mindset of the end user is the problem. The end user fundamentally isn't the problem. The end user is fundamentally part of the phishing defense solution. And if we take a look at a representative sample of industries that we work with in terms of delivering phishing simulation capabilities through CSI, we can see that finance has a really, really strong resilience, which is the blue dot at the top. And basically all right, sorry about that, guys. So let's then take a look at the financial services over the last 4 years in more general here. So we can see that we've seen a steady increase in that resilience. So far this year, seen an average of 4.56 on resilience. So 4.5 people on average reporting for every one user that is susceptible. So again, we're starting to develop this network of human sensors, and it is these users that are reporting that is giving us visibility here. So we can see so far in 2020, based on all simulations sent to financial services customers, there's an average susceptibility of 8%, but with an average reporting rate of 36.6%. From here. So a really, really strong and actually sort of fairly industry leading in terms of financial services, often leads the way in terms of having this very, very strong reporting culture. So there are really kind of 3 fundamental critical capabilities for phishing defense. One is to protect against known threats. 2 is to get visibility of threats that technology missed. And then 3rd is that ability to be able to respond faster to hunt, contain, and mitigate these attacks. And it really all starts with phishing detection and response being central to everything we do around our phishing defense programs. And so the first thing we want to be able to do is identify those threats. We've got to get visibility of those threats that exist inside our environment. And really that's all about creating that network of human sensors, raising end user awareness, conditioning those employees to recognize threats, and then enable and empower them to report. And fundamentally what we're doing is we want to rehearse the behavior that is needed in a real attack situation. The next thing we need to do is be able to respond faster. And that is when we've got our users that are reporting and giving us visibility, well, visibility only comes when we can cut through the noise of the false positives to be able to find the bad stuff quickly. So we've got to give security teams that ability to be able to cut through the noise. And we really want to support our awareness programs by making sure we're giving timely feedback to the end user when they're reporting. Because if we're asking them to be that human sensor and we're asking them to click that report phishing button and report these threats, we want them to know that it's not just disappearing into a black hole, that we do have that ability to be able to respond quickly. And then once we identify threats, we've got to take rapid and decisive action to neutralize them. So we've got to be able to quickly hunt for the full scope of an attack within our environment. And we want to do that without any impact on the messaging infrastructure. We've got to do that in a very secure and compliant way. And we want to be able to very, very quickly reduce the attack surface, reduce our exposure time, and quarantine those threats. And then lastly, we want to be able to share intelligence and improve defense. And that's all about proactively defending the organization. It's about understanding the current phishing threat landscape, understand how that landscape might relate to us. So if there are specific tactics or techniques that are being exploited by threat actors. Well, what is the risk of those tactics and techniques to our organization, and how do we need to adjust and tune our controls to make sure that we're not susceptible to those particular threats? And fundamentally, we want to be able to increase the relevance of our awareness programs, because there's no point running phishing simulation programs or awareness programs that bear no resemblance to the actual threat landscape. Because then, you know, you're conditioning your employees to be able to recognize a phishing simulation, not a real threat. And that's really important. And, you know, this is where the phishing defense managed services that are delivered by CSI come in, is really kind of helping you to deliver those capabilities within your organization. And you know what, it's not just us that says this. There's quite a lot of sort of growing independent opinion now around the importance of the end user within overall phishing defense programs. So NIST talk about it in the US in terms of better understanding the role of the end user in early detection, even though you can't just eliminate click rates in your organization. Gartner talk about that importance to integrate employees into the solution and then build those capabilities to detect and respond. And the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, you know, says, you know, if you just have one user that reports a phish, well, then you get a head start on defending your organization against an attack that's in progress, and then obviously presents one less opportunity for attackers. And then in terms of how this really kind of relates to sort of the NIST framework, as an example, you know, we start with sort of identify. That's really all about having that understanding of the threat landscape and really understanding how that fast evolving threat landscape and those emerging threats. So we can then identify the threats, identify the risks to our organizations. We then sort of move into protect, which is then using that threat intelligence to either tune our defenses or to feed our controls so that we can proactively block known threats rather than be susceptible to those. It's about real world phishing simulations. It's about conditioning our end users to recognize real threats, sending them simulations that actually mirror the real threats that have been observed in the wild, help them understand what are the tactics and techniques that end users or the threat actors are using. Detect is all about that network of human sensors, getting visibility of those threats, and then respond is all about that expert threat analysis that CSI can deliver in terms of really understanding, you know, what is it that my users are receiving, what is it that my end users are reporting, and how can we then get intelligence around those threats to then better defend the organization. So in terms of, you know, putting it into action, I can tell a story here. So this is related to the bizarre backdoor payload. So these are emails that landed in the end user's inbox. And in this case here, an end user that was well conditioned to recognize and then report threats, reported the threat using Cofense Reporter. It then was analyzed within the phishing defense team. And 8 minutes after they submitted their report, well, they got an email that gave them an analysis outcome, and that email was quarantined within the environment. But that's not the full story, right? So if we look at the full story, well, between 1657 and 1709, there were 15 emails for this particular threat that were received and then reported. And then between the time of 1709 and 1733, well, some escalations occurred within the phishing defense teams, and responses were sent to those end users. But importantly, 12 minutes after the first threat was reported, 92 emails from the same campaign were identified and were then quarantined and remediated within the environment. And then actually after the following 24 minutes, after 1709, there were 22 additional emails that came in on subsequent waves of the same attack that were just automatically quarantined because those threats had been seen before. We understood what it was. We can then just quarantine that threat automatically. But again, that's not the full story. That's looking at one organization. So over the next 2 hours, after that time, 15 other customers received similar campaigns that are delivering bizarre backdoor. And every one of those campaigns bypassed secure email gateways from Microsoft, Proofpoint, Mimecast, Cisco, and Symantec. Again, 31 instances of those emails were received and then reported, and further 103 emails were identified across those customers and were then automatically remediated, those emails that hadn't been reported. So if it wasn't for those well-conditioned end users being in the position to be able to recognize the threat and then enabled and empowered to report it, the security teams would unlikely have got visibility of that threat within that sort of 12-minute window, and then wouldn't have been able to search and then find the further instances that lurked within other inboxes and then pull them from those particular mailboxes. So just to wrap up here, if we're thinking about our phishing defense programs, there's sort of a number of questions we sort of need to ask ourselves, and that is, well, what is our understanding of the current phishing threat landscape and the risk to our business? Because phishing changes, and it changes every single day. It's probably the most dynamic threat type that organizations face today. Threat actors are constantly innovating, constantly changing the tactics and techniques that they use to either deliver the email to the mailbox or entice the end user to click and to become susceptible, deliver a payload or what have you. So then if we kind of think about, how do I understand the threat landscape? How do I then get visibility of the threats that are bypassing my email security tools and are delivered to user inboxes? On average across our customers, we're identifying around 3,500 threats per customer per year that they're having to respond to protect their organization that they were otherwise blind to. And it's well-conditioned end users that are identifying every single one of those attacks. So then we need to kind of understand, well, what's our ability to quickly analyze and understand those threats that are actually inside our environment? And then what is our capability to be able to quickly respond and to contain the threats to then reduce the risk of compromise or data breach? But with that, Matthew, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much, David. Much appreciated. Unnecessary. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to send it through the chat. We're sort of closing up now, so if you would like to ask any questions, please do. There's an opportunity to do that now. We will follow up this webinar anyway. We'll send a recording of the webinar to you, so you have that as a reference. And we'll welcome any sort of feedback that we can come for you. That anything within the phishing, we were more than happy to take this up with you and progress. If you've got any questions, or if you want to see a demonstration of the Cofense system, or just get engaged generally about how potentially we could help you with phishing. Other than that, if anybody got any questions, we will wrap up right now. Okay, no, appreciate your attendance so much, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you very much.